are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, Tulane parents. This is Penny Wyatt. I'm the Director of Parent Programs and External Relations in the Division of Student Affairs. Welcome to our Off-Campus Housing Resources webinar. I know that some students have already started looking, or they're definitely considering, and the parents have a lot of questions, and you are, for the most part, far away from New Orleans, and so we want to try to help fill in the gaps of information that you might have. Provide some typical elements, some descriptions of the housing market here, and give you some suggestions and guidance to give your student as they're considering this possibility. So before I get started, I do want to just remind you of a couple of procedural things. So you are not mic'd, but you will have the ability to type in questions at the end of the webinar if you have questions. I ask that you hold those questions until the end because I've tried to anticipate most of the questions that you have, and we've done this webinar several times, so I think we've refined it over time. So I'll let you know when we get to that point in the questions. And this is the volume that we'll have for the webinar, but you can adjust that on your side. So you can use the controls on your computer to turn that up or down. I do like to just double check that you can hear me, and so to make sure that both the audio and the video are working. So on your screen, there is a little control button that you have through the webinar system that looks like a hand. And so you can raise your hand. If you click on that, it'll raise your hand and tell me that you can hear me. So I'm going to wait to see some people do that. That's good. I know some other people are probably looking for the little hand. So it looks like we're all a go here, so that's great. So I'm going to lower your hands now. I'll ask you some other questions as we get into the content, but for now that's helpful. And I will say that if questions come up at the end that I cannot answer, then I will try to research that and include that in an email to all of you. I will send a PDF of the webinar slides to you sometime tomorrow. So that you'll have that reference information right away. You don't have to worry about taking notes tonight. And then give us another couple of days, it'll probably be Friday or Monday, and we'll have a link to the combined audio video recording on our website, and it'll be at parents.tulane.edu, and you go to the webinar tab, and it's in the archive section. So I want to just show you what we'll be covering tonight. There's a lot of information, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly so that we'll have time for your questions. And as most of our webinars are, there's going to be a lot more text on the screen than you might see in a presentation that was given live. But that's because I want to make sure that you've got all of these details to refer to later. And we also have a lot of people who, we have even more parents who access these webinars after they're presented live. And so I like to make sure that if someone were just looking at the webinar slides, that they've got most of the content there. I also tried to do this so that if you wanted to send it on to your student, then it's written and elaborated upon in ways that'll help them consider all of these different things that we'll discuss tonight. So we'll go through the purpose that we have for this, and then what's required and what's possible, tell you a little bit about the university neighborhood rental market, and then we'll just go through a lot of things to consider and resources to help. And I know that what you all probably want most is the list of local agencies, and you want to know where students should look for apartments. And so we'll get to that, but I think there's a lot to consider or to help your students consider. And we'll also supply some checklists and questions that students can ask landlords. Since you won't be there, I think it's really good that you see the kinds of things that they ought to ask about, especially because of the type of housing we have around here. And then if you're still in that process where you're considering on versus off, then there are a couple of final points I want to make about that to help you just weigh everything. So first I'd like to ask if you would raise your hand if you're the parent of a rising junior for whom this might be the first opportunity that they have to live off campus because they're currently a sophomore and so they had to live on campus. So that gives me some context to know who's tuned in. Okay, then now if you'll raise your hand if you are the parent of a current junior rising senior or maybe someone even older than that, perhaps a senior staying for grad school. So that's really helpful. Okay, the other question I want to ask is raise your hand if your student is already thick in the middle of this process. They've been talking about it, you know they've investigated some apartments or they've talked to older upper class friends about apartments. That helps me a lot too. Okay, thank you. How many of those people have already signed leases? Has anybody really completed the process? So it looks like there are a few people here. So some of this initial information may not be as helpful, but if your student's already signed a lease or you're a little bit worried about it, there could be some things here to consider that could just be really helpful information for you and your student to know as they're going through this and embarking on this new living situation. So how many of you have students who are still kind of weighing the pros and cons, or perhaps they want to move off, but you're not so sure about that? So if you'll raise your hand, that'll give me some sense of where we are. Okay, well, that's really helpful. Thank you, everybody. So I want to just start with a really important note. That's why it's written in red. So the university and my office of parent programs cannot endorse or recommend any particular apartments or specific landlords or neighborhoods, or some people have even asked about particular streets. And so we can't do that or give you specific recommendations about businesses related to off-campus housing because it's so wide, so varied, it can change so much from month to month that what we are here to do though is give you a compilation of resources so that you know what to investigate and you can help your student investigate those options. So we want to alert you to dynamics that you might not have anticipated and certainly that some of your students wouldn't have anticipated. But in terms of giving you hard and fast recommendations, that's just something that is far too complicated for us to do. And I think you kind of understand the liability that would be there. And so we want to make sure that we offer you good things to make good choices and but we wouldn't want to steer you in the wrong direction one way or the other. So with that caveat, we'll start and I'll just remind you that on-campus residency is required of all first year and sophomore students, and that is based on their total academic years in college, not on credit hours. So if you have a first year student who came in with a lot of AP credit or overloaded already or did some kind of special summer program where they were able to earn college credit and right now they're a sophomore so they think that they could get to be of junior status by next fall. That's not the way it's counted at Tulane in terms of residency. So they have to have lived on campus for those 4 semesters, first year, second year. So juniors and seniors may live off campus, but remember they are not required to live off campus. I see a lot of buzz out there that students might tell their parents that they have to live off campus or there's no room for juniors or seniors on campus. And that's just not true. It may be something they want to tell you to convince you that they can take that step. But if you're still weighing the options, I do want you to know that there are many options on campus for juniors and seniors. And especially for this coming year, there will be more spaces for juniors and seniors in the Aaron Residences apartment complex, which is on campus. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that has 3, 4, and 5 bedroom units, and it's an apartment setup. So they have a living room and a small kitchen. Utilities are all included, and new for this coming year that Aaron will remain open during winter break. So I want to tell you a little bit about what to anticipate about the neighborhood rental market around here. And I will say that I'm not a real estate agent, and I'm not trying to rent any apartments, but I have lived uptown near the university, usually within almost walking distance of the university in several different places. So some of this is born from my own experience, listening to students for years and years, and having a lot of different friends who've also lived around here, and consulting with some other people beyond those at Tulane to bring you some of this information. So like so many other things about New Orleans, food, music, architecture, the local rental market is rather unique. Most of the apartments near campus are likely to be in shotgun doubles. So if you recognize that terminology about our special architecture, those are duplexes, but they're set up a little differently than duplexes anywhere else. And so one room is followed by the next in a line. And that's just the type of housing that is plentiful in this neighborhood and nearby. And so oftentimes those are divided straight in half. They're called shotgun doubles because you can divide them in half. They're mirror images of each other. And sometimes they're owner occupied, and so the owner lives in one side and rents the other. And then sometimes, both sides are rented. Another type of duplex that is pretty plentiful around here too is where the two apartments are on separate floors. So one is right on top of the other, stacked. But the thing is, there are also a lot of large houses, so they would have started out as single-family homes, and they've been carved up into different apartments. And there might be studio apartments. There might be a 3-bedroom apartment on one side of the house and, a 2-bedroom on the other. There might be a family who lives in the house, and they have sort of a small studio apartment or, 1-bedroom apartment kind of carved out of their house, what some people might think of as like a mother-in-law apartment, but they've just been adapted that way over time. So you can drive down the street sometimes and not know which ones are single-family homes and which ones are apartments. The telltale sign that I used to look for with my friends or new people at Tulane when I was helping them look for apartments was multiple mailboxes and multiple electricity meters. And sometimes, the type of lawn furniture that might be around would tell you that they were students and not full-time residents. But there's just a lot of variety around this area. And that's really true for very much of just New Orleans proper. More of those multi-dwelling apartment complexes that you find everywhere else in the country are located around the periphery and in the suburbs. So there are not that many apartment complexes near campus. So that means that finding apartments in New Orleans takes more research and usually more effort than other places. And so that's especially why we want to give you some guidance. Some of the apartments are managed by their individual owners, and they might, like I said, rent out half of their house, or they've bought a few as income producing properties, and so you may work with an individual who doesn't have that many different apartments. Sometimes people own a lot of apartments, and sometimes those apartments are handled by a management company, so you're not working directly with the owner. One thing that's really important, I think, to find out is whether the landlord lives nearby, either in the neighborhood or at least within, easy distance of the university area, or whether they're out of town, because sometimes that can delay communication and response time from them. The other thing that you need to know is that most leases are year-long, and they run from June 1st to May 31st. With Tulane and Loyola next door to each other in this neighborhood, I mean, unfortunately, they are just sort of, they're at the mercy of the market. And so, most owners are going to want to get 12 months rent. And so that is something you should anticipate and understand and plan for. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's just almost a given. So whereas in other places, you have these big apartment complexes and there's a management office right there on site, and they have a staged model apartment. You could walk in anytime between 9 and 5 and say, I'd like to see what you have available and when, and see a model so I can see what it looks like. That's just not so likely here. It's really unlikely. So students have to use other strategies to find apartments. So as you're helping your student think about this, I'm going to run through these really quickly because it's not necessarily for you to consider, but it is something to guide your student to think about if you're not hearing these kinds of things in their thinking. Things to consider are roommates. They need to be thoughtful in choosing their roommate or their roommates, their apartment or housemates. I know that sometimes is one of the driving factors. The students think, I don't want to have this same situation, or I want my own room. So while they may have the privacy of their own room, there's a lot of other shared considerations that they have to deal with. So a lot of different, space dynamics. So they really should consider all of those and think through them and talk through them before they sign a lease. So one thing is, just sharing the responsibility for expenses. They don't really have to do that on campus. They've got to do their own housekeeping, and they've got to, negotiate that with their roommates. They need to talk about their sleep, study, and fun habits because they're going to all be living in this shared space, and it'll really affect each other, and expectations about visitors and overnight guests. And the thing about living off campus is there's no one else like a resident advisor or housing staff members or, the university conduct process and policies to manage that or to enforce any kind of expectations. So the students have to be able to do that on their own. Another thing about roommates is we strongly encourage your student to visit the property with all the roommates. It's really not good if one person finds the apartment and convinces everybody else to sign on, and then your student never saw it and gets into something they didn't anticipate or weren't pleased with because they signed on the dotted line before they really knew everything about the apartment. And another thing that they can use to look for roommates is a Facebook group that's part of it's a student organization's Facebook group. It's called OKRA. It stands for Off-Campus Residents Association. So we'll have some more information about that. But that is something that if your student's interested but they haven't found apartment mates, then that is something that a lot of students use to network. They also use it to find apartments. So that's a really great resource. It's a student organization that was, initiated by students themselves several years ago. It represents off-campus students and their interest to the student government, but primarily it operates as this Facebook group to facilitate communication. So I've given you the URL to their group. It is an open group, but that would be something to tell your student to, join that group so they can see the postings. It's a really good resource to find listings for available properties. They'll also tell each other about landlords and recommend really great landlords. It's where people will say, I've got an apartment and I need one more person, or an individual will say, I need some roommates who has a spot open. It's also where they'll give each other data about the costs, the rent and utilities and that kind of thing, and so it can help students get an idea of that. And they can also ask their peers questions about the neighborhoods or locations, and that's going to be very helpful just to have that peer-to-peer assistance. So the other thing, and this was probably your first consideration and not necessarily your students, but cost. And again, because there is such a wide variety of housing types, apartment types, sizes, the number of rooms, where they're located, the quality of the space, how well it's been kept up, the amenities and the quality level of those amenities, the rent varies so much. There is no way I could even give you a typical amount. So I think that you do need to have your student, check some postings, look online, start to investigate and get a sense of the rent ranges, and then talk with them more about the costs, and then set a price range you want them to stay within, because looking at things like this on your own, that if you don't set a budget and then you start looking, your budget will creep up and up and up, and then you'll get enamored with some place that's maybe out of your price range, and you don't want that to happen and have to negotiate that from afar with your student, or perhaps have them feel pressured because they're trying to go in with several other people to make this decision. It'll be really good if you consider some of those things and help your students set a budget. And the other thing that they have to consider is it's not just rent. It's not just that monthly rent for 12 months, but it's utilities, including internet and cable. They have to think about transportation, food, furnishings, all of that and more. So help them consider all of that. The other thing that I think is really important to consider is transportation. Whether or not your student will have their own or not have their own transportation, I think there's some key things here for you to think about and some good guidance for your students to consider. And so if they are going to need transportation, if they don't have their own, then I think a smart thing to do is to check our shuttle routes to see if the property they're looking at is conveniently located. Now, our Gold Zone shuttle was specifically designed to help students get from campus to home off campus. And this has been refined over several years as they've kind of observed the patterns of where students live and looked at the time students need transportation and all of those kinds of things. So it's really been created to assist in this. It's shared transportation. It's not point to point like a cab picking you up at one place and dropping you off. It's going to, try to get as many people as it can, in a certain area and certain time frame, so that it's efficient, but overall. But it is really a great resource. The zone is shown on the gold zone part that's underlined there, links to their webpage, which will show you the map. And these points might not mean anything to you until you start talking to your student and looking on a map, but it's a pretty wide swath of the New Orleans Uptown area, from the Mississippi River to Earhart Boulevard in one direction, and then Louisiana Avenue to the Jefferson Parish line. So that's a great big spot. I'll show you a map in a minute so you can see what that covers. The transportation runs 6 p.m. until 2 or 3 a.m., 7 days a week while classes are in session. It picks up from campus and drops off to any residence or vehicle within that zone. It'll take students from residence to residence or residence to campus, but it's not designed to take them to businesses, with the one exception being pharmacies, because we want to help students if something has come up and they're sick and they have to pick up a prescription, then it will take them to a nearby pharmacy. So the other thing that's great about this is that there's a lot of good technology that's supporting this whole thing. And so students can either call the number in the old-fashioned way, or they can download this mobile app from the website that's called TapRide, and it gives them a drop-down list of campus spots, and that when they log in to request a pickup, it'll give them an estimated time of arrival so that they can, estimate that and know how long to wait, how long their wait is. If it's too long a wait for your student at that moment and then they want to call Uber, they could do that, but it's nice that it gives them that ETA. And then they can even track the vehicle by GPS, and then when the vehicle arrives, they get a text message, and then there's a little horn feature because they want the students to stay inside wherever they are and wait until they're notified that the vehicle is there. So there's a lot of really good safety measures built into this. So I think it's a smart thing to use the gold zone as a limiting feature for where your student will look. And so that's one suggestion that I'll give you. Now we also have a different shuttle that's the Uptown Downtown shuttle. So if your student were going to be in the graduate housing that's at the Papillon apartment complex, then it stops there. But they would also pick up students who live close to that, even if they don't live at the Papillon. If they show their 2-lane ID, they can get on that 2-lane Uptown Downtown shuttle. So if they don't want to stay within that zone, but they find something that's a little further out, then it's smart for them to see if it's on the Uptown Downtown shuttle route and how close it would be to its scheduled stops. It's not going to stop just anywhere. It has, particular stops. The other place that the head of the transportation department told me about this week as I was preparing this is that it also stops at the Tulane City Center, which is an outpost of one of our architecture programs, and it is near one of the few apartment complexes that we have, which is called the Muses. And by we, I mean in the city. It is not at all a 2-lane apartment complex. But he said he's noticed that there are more and more Tulane students who are living there, and they're using that stop at the city center to go back and forth to campus. Some other transportation considerations are that, yes, we have public transportation by the streetcar and buses, and so the routes you can find online. They can also buy streetcar and bus tokens here on campus at the same office where they can add money to their splash card. So that's a little measure of convenience that they could have if they want to use public transportation. Now, even if they will have their own car here, there's some considerations that they need to keep in mind. They should check with the property owner to see if the property offers off-street parking. And I will tell you that is very, very rare. These are older homes many of them were built in the 1900s, and they were not designed for automobiles. So it's really dense in the neighborhoods here, and there's not a lot of off-street parking. So everybody is kind of scrambling to do that. And because of the university being here and it being so crowded, then some of the streets require permits to park. So you have to have a residential parking permit that you have to get. And so the landlord could tell them, whether or not that's necessary, and they would have to go to City Hall to get that permit, and they would probably have to take their lease to show that they will be living in that area. They need some kind of documentation that they're on that street, and then that would allow them to get a parking permit. They would also need a parking permit if they're going to come to campus in their car. And so I've listed for you an example of what the commuter permit rates were for this year. So I don't know if they'll go up next year, but that gives you a sense of how they run and everything. Now there is a free off-site parking lot that's at University Square, which is about a mile or so from campus. And there is a shuttle that runs back and forth from that Monday through Friday, but it was designed primarily for faculty and staff, and that is who predominantly uses it is staff. But students could use that if they live farther out and they want to drive there. They don't want to have to pay for a permit. But it's because it's designed mostly for people who work here. That's why the hours are limited from 7 to 6:35. So, another thing that I would imagine is a primary concern of yours is safety and security. And there's also a lot of elements to this that students might take for granted and not think about. So I want to mention them so that you will mention them to your student. And that is that they need to look for smoke and carbon monoxide detectors in the apartment. They're required, but not all landlords are good about making sure those are in place or maintained. They should check to see that there are strong locks on all the doors and the windows. Deadbolt locks on the doors and that kind of thing. Also good lighting at the entrances. And I talk about this because a lot of these apartments are part of someone's house. And so it might be that you have to walk down the narrow side of the house to a back door in the backyard or something. And it might not be all that visible from the street. So I think it's really important for them to make sure there's good lighting at the entrances on the street, and especially along that route from the street to the door. And I always recommend, if they can, to visit the apartment when it's dark, just to kind of check that out. And then they'll see, would I feel safe going from my car or being dropped off here to get to that door? So it's definitely something to think about. So they might not see the whole apartment at nighttime, but they might want to go back by later and just kind of check that out. The other thing that is smart to tell them to look for, again, because these are in homes, there's trees and bushes and flowers and everything around, or they might have their set of, trash cans or utility closet or something outside. So tell them to look for clear pathways and sight lines to all the entrances and exits, that they're not overgrown, that those things are taken care of. It looks really clear. Another thing that my father, who not by trade but by temperament is like a fire safety inspector, is that I would recommend is that having more than one exit is a fire safety measure. So they may want to double check about that. And check to see if the window is the only other alternative to get out of the house. If there's a fire blocking the door, then they ought to ask or check to see if the windows are painted shut, because some of these houses are very old and they've been painted over for decades and decades and decades, and sometimes those windows won't open. So it's just another little thing to think about. A lot of these places will have a built-in security system and something that's electronic and everything's wired. So they can ask about that, but they should ask how it works. And, if somebody accidentally sets it off, who calls the company, how does that work? So another thing they could ask about. If you want to get a sense of the history or patterns of crime, then you can check the New Orleans Police Department crime map. And so I've given you the URL for that. And that is really your best way to check that on your own. Things can change so much from year to year, and it just wouldn't be responsible of me to even try to give you a sense of that, because I might not know everything that's happened everywhere, and things can change. So I think it's more important in some ways to look for all of these other safety and security measures and get your student to think about all of these things. So you're not just thinking about, well, did this seem like a good street when their friend lived here 5 years ago? But they look at some of these things in sort of recent history and patterns. But also think about these other small things that might not occur to them. They might think that it looks like a really great street, but they haven't really checked to see if all of these other things exist in terms of security issues. So another thing that has to be carefully considered is the lease. And this may be the first time that your student's ever been asked to sign some kind of, legally binding document like this. And so it's really, really important that you help them look over that and that you've looked over it too. But a wonderful resource that exists at Tulane is our Tulane Legal Assistance Program. It goes by the acronym TULAP. So it is staffed by Tulane law students. They're law clerks. It's funded by the Tulane student government, and they keep two lawyers on retainer. So they have a civil clinic and a criminal clinic, but within the civil clinic, then they have students who will, law students who will review leases with students. And they also have a wonderful web page here that I've listed for you, where they just give a lot of great things about what to look for before signing. And so I highly recommend that you take a look at that web page and that you send that to your student. But they can also make an appointment for one of those staff members to review their lease before they sign it. So the thing to know about that is that I talked to their director last week, the best way to reach them and make that appointment is to do it online. When they go to that website, there's a portal for them to use. And the civil clinic is only on Fridays, so it has to be scheduled on a Friday. It is right here on campus. It's on the back of Butler Hall, which is one of the first-year residence halls. And another service that they offer is just notary services. Not that you would need that for leases necessarily, but it's something else they offer for free. So I highly recommend that you have your student do that. Another thing to consider is that some or all of the utilities are not always included. So students have to arrange those, and they have to do it in advance. And those also require deposits. So it's part of the upfront cost of moving off campus. So they really do need to be careful about that. Look to see what's in the lease, talk to the landlord about it. And sometimes the landlord may have some idea of the range of the cost of the utilities from having other tenants and kind of knowing that. So sometimes it might have one utility included, like maybe the cable is included or water is, but it could be that your student is going to have to set up accounts for each one of these different utilities separately. And in some cases they have to go in person to the office, and in most cases they have to provide some kind of documentation that they have some tie, they have some claim to that apartment, that address. So the other thing that you should consider and have your student consider is renter's insurance. We tell you this about living in the residence halls too, but especially when they're off campus and there are more different things in that space and it's shared with other people. First of all, they really need to get on the same page with their roommates about locking their doors and keeping everything secure and making that a habit. But for all kinds of different things, things that can happen, then renter's insurance is highly recommended. Now, some parents, homeowners insurance will cover their students while they're at college, even if they live off campus, but you really need to check the particulars of your own policy. If not, then it's really smart to just purchase separate renters or homeowners insurance for this, the duration of the student's lease for that property. So the other thing I want to think about, and maybe part of why I want to tell you this is to validate that you might have some concerns or you feel kind of cautious about your student taking this step. And so from what I've observed and the students I've talked to over years and years at Tulane, I thought I would just kind of put this out there that it's really smart to help your student problem solve, think through, kind of give this some thought about whether or not they're ready and willing to take on those additional responsibilities. So, these are just good questions to ask. Is your student assertive enough to negotiate all those living arrangements with not just one other person, but perhaps 3 or 4 other people? Is your student assertive enough and conscientious enough to communicate with landlords and utility companies or repair people who might have to come to the apartment and take care of things? Or if they don't think something is repaired to the level that they want or the quality, can they be assertive and communicate about that? We also hope that your students are ready to be good neighbors. The area around campus is not all students, there are residents of all ages, from babies to retirees. A lot of families living nearby, and so they do need to be considerate of that they're out in the real world, and that means that there are other people who aren't just 18 to 22-year-old college students living near them that they need to be considerate of. And the other thing is not necessarily readiness, but perhaps just the whole convenience factor is, will your student in this upcoming year have the time and energy to take care of all of those extra responsibilities, given their academic load or new co-curricular commitments, or if they're a senior and they're going to be searching and applying to graduate school or professional school or launching that job search? Are all of these other things to take care of things that they really want to have to be saddled with in this upcoming year? I've actually known some students who lived off campus their junior year and then knew they were facing a year like this and decided to move back on campus for their senior year. So just another thing to consider and help them think through. So this will get down to a little bit more the nitty-gritty that I think most of you probably want, but I wanted to make sure you had all those other considerations to think about. So strategies that Tulane students use to find off campus, given that we've got these unique dynamics here, are to explore within nearby zip codes, and as I mentioned, within that Tulane shuttle route. So the zip codes to look for that are close by and within that frame are 70118, 70125, and 70115. So if you stay with those, then you're going to be closer to Tulane's campus. Again, visit that Facebook group to connect with roommates or to find apartments or to post your own, your student's own request. And then they can contact rental agencies that specialize in this area near the university in the Uptown area. And I do have some specifics about those to share with you. They can also check classifieds. There's a Tulane classifieds website or Facebook group too. I think people use that a little bit more for furniture and other things like that than necessarily apartments. So, there's always things on bulletin boards, but so much more of this kind of, communication goes on through online mechanisms. So that's just going to be the way that students will do that. But then there's also a lot of passing apartments down from friends to friends. So word of mouth from older students is one of the prime ways that they're advertised. And so if your student's not already connected to some older students where they're going to hear about those kind of things, it might be worth waiting another year so that they kind of make some of those connections. But that is definitely a way that apartments can go. It actually makes it hard for those of us who work at Tulane who want to live close by sometimes to get good apartments, because they just kind of get passed down informally from one group to the other. They have formal leases, but a lot of times if a student or a group of students have been good tenants, then their landlord will say, hey, do you have any friends who'd be good like you who could take your place next year? Send me somebody that you really recommend. And, or students do the same thing. Hey, I have a great landlord in a really good place, so how about if I connect you with them? So there's a lot of that goes on informally that you need to be aware of. So here's that map that shows you Uptown and those different zip codes. And I will show you here with the little cursor how this overlaps with the gold zone. And so it's very similar. So this is the Jefferson Parish line. Here in Louisiana, we don't call them counties, they're parishes. So this is Orleans Parish on this side, and that's Jefferson Parish. So that's the edge. And here's the Tulane campus right here in the middle. And so it is everything from the river to Earhart Boulevard. So you'll see there's a part of 70125 zip code and 70115 that's not within the gold zone, but it's closer to I-10. So everything within here. And then I'm pretty sure this is Louisiana Avenue, which is the outer limit of the gold zone. So that can help if you'll tell your students to look within that frame. So the other thing that I have for you here and are a list that we've refined over the years of rental agencies that work within the Uptown market with rentals. A lot of them also work with home purchases, but these will have rental properties. Now, I'm going to send you the PDF of the whole webinar, but I'm going to send you a separate PDF of this document to make it even easier for you, and then you can just forward it on to your student. So I thought I would just show you that you can go back and look at this later, but I double checked this last week and called all of these places just to make sure that they are still working with rentals, and said, I'm going to be doing this and giving this information to parents. So I want to make sure that you are willing to work with students to look for rentals. And so in many cases, I also got to talk to one of the agents for a little bit. So I have some quotes that they gave me just to share with you. And so I thought I would bring out a couple of these points too. So one woman said that subleasing, like for summer semester, students aren't going to be here, if they're going to be away for one of the semesters, fall or spring, that is up to the lessor, meaning the landlord, and not something the realtor approves. So the student has to ask the listing agent who's representing the lessor if that would be allowed, because it's on a case-by-case basis. It may not be in the lease, or it may say that the standard lease may say that's not allowed. So if they want to have that considered, they should ask, because if they do it and a problem occurs, then it's, they are the ones responsible. Even if they sublet, they might still be responsible. So they really need to know the parameters of that and really work that out, because I know that people don't like having to pay for, say, the summer months when the student's going to be back at home, and they want to, get that, collect the rent from somebody else, but they need to be really careful about that and make sure that it's approved ahead of time. Another agent said that they're getting barraged right now with some phone calls from students, and it's really too early. And he said, I don't know who told them that they need to start looking now, but this is just not how it works. It's best to look about 60 days before you would want the lease to start, because that's when they'll know their inventory, because usually in the lease there's a requirement that for a student to end the lease, they have to notify the landlord or the agent 60 days before the lease ends, because sometimes that lease would automatically renew if they don't give that that notice. So, that's one thing they really need to be aware of, that it's not too late right now to start looking. Now, there may be students who are starting to network through other friends and make those connections. And so there might be people who, because they know that they're leaving and they have a good relationship with their roommate, they may be kind of helping do that sort of informal connecting. But with things that are going to be listed through an agent, this is the time frame that they need to think about. The other thing that he was really wanting to caution people about was using things like Craigslist or other online services, and not going and seeing something in person. He said that sometimes there have been people who misrepresented the apartment with fake photographs, and told people they had to give an advance deposit before they could even see an apartment. And I think in some ways those traps probably happen more for students who are not here yet. Maybe they're coming from another country, or they're transferring, or graduate students. They're not in New Orleans and they're having to rely more on doing this remotely, and they can probably be very vulnerable to being taken advantage of this way. But he did just want to mention this. And he said the other thing to know is that you don't have to pay a deposit just to see an apartment. If somebody asks for that, then he said run. You might have to submit a deposit with an application, and that's very typical, because if their application is deemed acceptable, it's not going to hold the apartment unless there's money given with it. So that's where you would probably have to have that deposit ready. So there are a few others of these real estate agents, realtors, and I listed their addresses, and these might not mean anything to you, but these streets are very close to campus. These places are within walking distance. So you'll see Maple Street, Leak Avenue is close to the river, Maple Street is close to campus, and Ferret. They're all really close. Another agency said, call ahead of time and request their current rental list, and then students can go check out the addresses, drive by and kind of look at them, and then call the rental agent that's associated with that, because they may have 20 agents that work with a whole lot of different rentals. And so it could be smarter that they narrow down which ones seem interesting to them based on the number of, they'll have specifications. They'll have the rent amount, they'll have the number of bedrooms, and they may have some more things about other amenities. And so students can narrow that down and then ask to speak to the agent that represents it. Another one of the realty company owners said that, again, it's really smartest to contact the agency about 4 to 6 weeks prior to the desired move-in date. They'll have a lot better, idea of what's available. They think it's best to email in advance to say, we were looking for this type of housing, this type of apartment, this many bedrooms with these amenities, or we want water included, or all utilities, or whatever, and so they can kind of narrow things down. And he reiterated that June through May is the typical lease term for rentals in this neighborhood. So I told you that there aren't a lot of apartment complexes, and I think of this as something that has more than 8 or 10 apartments in a complex. But here are a couple, and so I'll just list these for you. Now, I underlined the zip codes because those two places are not within those zip codes that I mentioned, but one of them, like I said, is close to the Uptown Downtown Shuttle, the Muses. It's 3.3 miles from campus, and the Soleil is 3.8 miles from campus. So their websites are there. In some cases, they say, call or email first to check about availability. And again, they're going to be year-long leases. So I hope that those that list of different businesses will be a starting point and let you know that there are people here who will help students look for that, but they've got to reach out to do that, and they're going to know the market, and they're used to this. If they have these agencies in this Uptown area near campus, then they're used to working with this type of apartment renting from students. So again, it's just really critical that your students see the property before renting and don't trust just pictures. And they can check out the crime map if they want to look at that. So here's a good checklist that you could share with your student or kind of walk them through. And again, I'm going to send this to you so you could forward this on to your student. To kind of go through those steps so they think about everything. They don't just get excited about the way one apartment looks or what their friends told them about it, but they really consider everything. And so that just puts in a checklist, the things that I've just reviewed. And then this is a good long list of questions your student should ask the landlords. If your student is not ready to have this kind of conversation and take their clipboard of all these questions and ask them all and take notes and have that kind of conversation, I don't think they're ready to live off campus. So I just want you to see that these are all the kinds of things they should ask about. Everything from how improvements or repairs are made, to what they'll be charged for, what would happen that might mean they didn't get their security deposit back, all of those kinds of things. So there's several questions for you to think about. Again, the subletting issue, dealing with neighbors, city permits for on-street parking. Another thing that I put on here that I think had been a part of this presentation for a while and maybe a lot closer to right after Hurricane Katrina, but to ask if the property was considered to be in an area prone to street flooding. Half of Tulane's campus was flooded in the federal flooding after Hurricane Katrina. And so that means half of the nearby neighborhood was as well. So everything from Ferret Street on towards the lake was underwater. So that means that some of these apartments are going to be renovated within the last 10 years because of that. But there's also just even without a horrible catastrophe like that, there are streets in Uptown that are prone to street flooding. And so it's a smart thing to just ask, because even if the apartment's okay, if they're parking on the street, that's something to think about. I mean, it's even things we have to think about on our campus. There are, colleagues of mine whose cars have been, flooded and water got, up into the car just from being on a campus street. So there are some areas right around the campus that are just lay pretty low. And so they may want to ask about that. And if the landlord doesn't tell them, they may want to ask some neighbors that they see in the area or talk to their friends about that too. And then there is one other type of apartment around here that I think it's especially important to ask about this. So we have some sort of craftsman style homes that are called raised basement houses. Now, you don't have basements underground in New Orleans because of the high water table and that we sit so close to sea level, but sometimes they'll take that area that was the part of the house, underneath the house, and they've created an apartment there. So sometimes they don't have high ceilings, and you walk to them right from the side of the house or something. But I've known some students who were in some of those basement, apartments, and they sat too low. So it's just a smart thing to ask about. And, a lot of times students also want to move off campus because they think they can get a dog or a cat, and they need to check that out in the lease, make sure that's allowed before they do something like that. So if you are still weighing the pros and cons of on campus versus off, I want to just provide a little bit of context and just advice for you. So if you probe why the student wants to move off campus and ask some, just some kind of searching questions, listen more about what it is they're looking for and how they want their life to change if they made this step, then you might find that staying on campus, but in other halls or room types, would offer the things they're looking for, and it doesn't necessitate a move off campus. So some of what they're looking for is more privacy. So something to keep in mind is that we've got upper class residence halls that have more suite style rooms, so they're not sharing that big community bath with 30 people or 20 people, but 2 or 3 or 4 people share a bathroom. We also have singles that are more likely to go to rising seniors or juniors than be available at the first year or sophomore level. For some of them, they're looking for freedom for the meal plan, and so they don't have to have the full meal plan if they're, juniors and seniors. And the other thing too is that if it's like, oh, I want my own kitchen. In our big freshman residence halls like Sharp and Monroe and Butler, we don't have that many community kitchens. But in the other residence halls, they're more there's more availability of community kitchens that, they might only be shared by 20 or 25 people in a hall or something, and not everybody's going to cook. So, that's something else for them to think about. So it's just more prevalent in the upper class areas. And if it's that they want apartment style amenities, they really need to consider Aaron residences. It's a good middle step to living off campus and having more of the amenities of apartments, like, living rooms and a small kitchen and, having those separate bedrooms. But it's right on campus. The utilities are included. For this coming year, something that'll be new is that Aaron will remain open over winter break. So if your student is considering an internship that would go through that break, or they need to come back early for something, then that's another thing to consider. And they are making an effort. They're changing things around in terms of the housing selection for next year so that there will be more spaces for juniors and seniors in this apartment complex. And it houses about 500 students. So I want you to be aware of that. And there are just another few final notes about on-campus housing, because I know some people had asked and they've contacted me by email. So just so that maybe you can help your student keep their options open for a bit, it's just to remember that the online application process will open February 15th, and then it closes March 15th. So they have to get that application in. Then they'll get their lottery time and day emailed to them over spring break. And then the room selection actually happens the 31st through 7th, and that's when they finalize getting a contract. But within the first week, they could cancel their contract with no penalty. If it's after 1 week, there's a $500 cancellation fee. After 2 weeks, it's a $1,000 cancellation fee. So if your student is in this process and things aren't quite coming together, but they're looking, they're investigating, but something's fallen through, or they're just still looking, they may want to, hedge their bets and put in an application while they're looking off campus, but be sure to cancel that or just withdraw from the process if they do get an apartment, or they need to pay attention to those deadlines for the cancellation fees. I know some people have asked about going abroad. So if they're going abroad in the fall, then they don't have to submit an application now, but they need to contact the Housing and Residence Life Office in late fall to get a spring application. And the assistant vice president who's in charge of housing told me that there will be space available. They haven't had a problem housing people who are coming back from being abroad in the fall, but they might not get their very first choice of, which building or particular rooms, because they just have to fill in, from different spots that are vacated. And this can be vacated for a variety of different reasons. Either people graduate early, or they're going abroad for the spring, or, sometimes they take a leave of absence or something. So there will be spaces that are available in the spring. If they're going abroad for spring next year in 2017, they need to go ahead and apply now for the process that'll be happening in the next month or so. But they need to notify HRL as soon as possible that they'll be away next spring so that then their housing contract is ended after fall and they're not charged for the spring. So some people have asked about the apartments or the buildings that house upper class students. So I just wanted you to know, and for your student to know, on this particular link that I've listed here near the bottom of the page, there is a web page that has links to every single residence hall, and it shows a description of them. And you scroll way down the page, and there's lots of specifications about them too. So it describes them. So there are residence halls that you may not have even heard of yet because your student's a first-year student, and their lives are kind of dominated by a few different residence halls. But there are other options, and most of these are a lot of them are newer housing, but they range from more suite style housing, either 8-person suites, or as I said, like a 2 or 3 or 4-person suite. And then there's the apartment complex. And then I wanted you to have that email address for the housing office so that that would be available too. So we're at that point where you can ask questions. So if you'll start typing those in, I'll try to take as many of those as I can. And as I said, if I don't know it, then I'll try to find that out for you. So I've had somebody say that the sound was breaking up, so I hope that that's cleared up. I'm starting to lose my voice, so if you hear some scratching, it's not the sound, it's me. So I'm just waiting to see other questions. So let me know if you have some other questions. So as I said, it's not too late, but I think it's a smart thing to do to have students start considering all these things so they can make good choices. So someone asked, studying abroad in the fall, wants to live off campus in the spring. So I would say that that is a little bit harder about looking off campus in the spring if they're going to be away. So what I see happening on that Facebook page and sort of that networking from student to student is a lot of that kind of thing, that they'll try to team up with somebody who's going to go abroad the opposite semester from them. And so since it is, excuse me, harder to do this from somewhere else remotely, then the best thing to do would be to really do a lot of research now, a lot of networking, talk to as many people they can about people who are going abroad and see if they can alternate spots off campus with someone. And it might not be that they're going abroad. They might have an internship somewhere, or maybe it's somebody who's graduating in December or something. So that's something to think about. And if they don't solidify that before they go, then, the other fallback is also to, apply for on-campus housing. Or again, 30 to 60 days from the time they would return in January. So, end of April, end of November, to reach out to some of these companies perhaps, or look on that Okra Facebook page to start trying to find something that way for their return to Tulane. So somebody said on that Gold Zone route, it says it runs from 6 p.m. till 2 a.m. So it does not run in the morning. So it is designed more for those nighttime hours when it's dark, after people have finished their day on campus. So a lot of people in those neighborhoods might walk to campus or bike to campus, but then not want to do that in the evening when it's dark. Or they would take the streetcar, but they just want to get home faster or something. So it doesn't run in the morning. That's not what it's designed to do right now. The needs seem to be, and students come to campus at so many different times because their classes vary, but if they stay on campus to eat or to study or go to a lab or meet with, other friends or something, then by about 6, and on through till 2 in the morning, that's when they're leaving campus. So, another question is, what's the last day a student can cancel their commitment to live on campus? So I don't have those exact days, and so I do think that they need to follow the information that comes from Housing and Residence Life. If they are currently living on campus, they're being barraged with emails about the on-campus selection process. And because that's going to open on the 15th of February, there's going to be a lot of information that comes from the housing office. So I know that they have some of those dates, and I'm sorry that I don't. Also, it can depend on when they go through the selection process. So although the application opens on the 15th and closes on the 15th of March, they'll get their assigned number because they get a priority number for when they will be able to make their selection. So it starts with seniors being randomly assigned within the senior class or rising senior class, then rising juniors, then rising sophomores. And so depending on which buildings they're interested in or their class year and what their lottery time is, then that's when they select their room. And I think it's that step which kind of locks in their contract. So that's what's important. So they need to just pay attention to all of that communication that's going to come from the housing office. So somebody asked about Aaron apartments. If it's a group of 5 and they want to live together, but 2 are going abroad in the fall, can they find 2 who are going abroad in the spring and lock in the unit? So that is something that they really do need to, that's worth going to the housing office and talking to somebody, because I'm not sure how they would handle that. And they probably need some assurances that those other 2 students would take their place. I mean, that just gets to be a little bit tricky. They can fill in spots if no one else has, if someone leaves, then there might be a 5-person apartment and 3 people stay, but 2 spots are open, and then those people don't come back to campus or something, and then those spaces could be filled by someone else. So they need to consider that too as a group of friends. Would we rather just get a smaller apartment with 3 of us and know that that's set for the whole year, or try to, do this other arrangement? So I think that's worth a visit to the housing office to talk with somebody a little bit more in depth about that. So suggestions about finding subletters for the fall semester. And I would say that Okra website, that Facebook group, is one of the best ways to do that besides just networking through friends. But it seems like that's frequently what's on there, are people making those kinds of posts that they'll be gone or they're looking for something. And so I definitely tell them to look through that. And then put the word out through, their friends, their connections, that kind of thing. So how do parents typically co-sign leases if they're out of town and can't get to NOLA? So I think that the big thing here is faxing or scanning the documents and emailing them to you and, getting them back. Or they may want to find out if the parent can then fax it directly to the real estate agent or email it to them. So I think they do want to be quick about that, because if there are a lot of people interested in the apartment, then the application that is found to be acceptable, and sometimes they are going to do things like check driving records or credit records, that kind of thing. Then the first time when the real estate agent knows that part's done, then it depends on how fast that paperwork comes back with the deposit. That's going to be what secures it. So they can't dawdle about that. They do have to be responsible with that part of it. So another question is need-based financial aid affected by living off campus versus on campus? And I will tell you that I think that financial aid is so important, and those policies are so prescribed that I try not to answer any of those, because I would not want to, accidentally give you the wrong information. So I think it's really important that the student contacts their financial aid officer, because if they're not clear about what's covered, and I know there are some kinds of scholarships and need-based aid that don't cover living off campus. It's a certain kind of scholarship, and so they deal only with those expenses that are sort of documented and vetted by the university, and so they go with things like on-campus dining and on-campus housing. But if your student's not sure, it really warrants a conversation with their academic advisor. So, if they go to not their academic advisor, I apologize, their financial aid counselor. So if they go to the financial aid website, the counselors are assigned in sections of the alphabet, so the student can look at, the one who's assigned to the part of the alphabet that with their last name, and they can find their counselor and set up an appointment or email and get that clarified. So a meal plan is not required for Aaron housing. Somebody asked about that. So they do have a kitchen. It's not a humongous kitchen, but it's a good size. It's not a dorm size refrigerator. It's a small apartment size refrigerator. May not be as big as your, double door humongous refrigerator that you have in your house, but it's a good refrigerator. Has a microwave and has a stove, an oven. And I think that they also have small dishwashers. So let's see. I'll make another last call for other questions, see if anything else comes up. So I hope this has been helpful. I know sometimes that you want to know exact addresses and assurances on all kinds of things, but there's such a wide variety of things that we just can't give you that specific information. So I want to give you this broad look at the dynamics to consider so that you can help your student walk through all of those things. It's a great experience. It can be really good for a lot of students to make this step and take on more responsibility and do that with friends, and to do that while they still have some support from you, even if you're not here, before they have to do this, when they move away for their first job. So for a lot of people, it's a good trial, but there's a lot about it that's just very real, and so they have to consider all of those ramifications and real world issues like paying bills and arranging all of those things, and take that initiative to do this kind of searching. It is not as easy as it is in other places where the rental market's different. So I hope it's been helpful. I am always open to suggestions, feedback. If you've got ideas or you want to make comments, you can. I appreciate that several of you put in a little thank you note within the question box, but you can always send me feedback to parents@tulane.edu, and that's how we keep improving the offerings that we have for parents every year. So I appreciate your helping me refine those. Again, I will send this to you tomorrow in an email, and I'll attach the PDF of all the slides and some of those sort of handy checklists and list of realtors for you. So again, thanks for tuning in, and have a good evening, and good luck with the whole process for you and your student.